From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts.
What I was missing was the fact that there is a reason all those things have to happen. And that is to ensure that the integrity of the community that you live in is maintained and the interests of the people who have a vested interest in the community are heard.
Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. This podcast is for everyone engaged in the complex work of local leadership. So whether you serve in local government or simply care about how your community moves forward, these conversations offer insights and inspiration to lead with integrity, foster togetherness, and engage people in ways that matter. Today's guest is Monte Lyons, a first-term member of the Gilbert, Arizona Town Council. Gilbert is located in the southeast Phoenix metro area, and with a population of about 300,000 residents, is not only one of Arizona's largest communities, but officially and proudly the largest incorporated town in the United States. Before stepping into local governance, Monte spent decades in the aerospace industry, including more than 25 years with Boeing in leadership roles involving manufacturing, logistics, engineering, and large-scale operations management. Today, I'm especially interested in exploring how someone shaped by the demanding engineering culture of aerospace, large-scale business operations, and worldwide logistics approaches the very different realities of public leadership, where success depends not just on systems and execution, but on negotiated agreement, community expectations, and public trust. Monte Lyons, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it.
We should say we're actually here in person. I rarely get to do these podcast conversations in person. We're in Gilbert Town Hall, and it's a beautiful day, and it's gorgeous offices here. So thanks for having me over.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Monte, before we talk about local government, let's talk about your leadership journey. Like I said in the intro, you spent decades in aerospace and advanced manufacturing, much of it with Boeing, in environments where I'm imagining precision, logistics, timing, accountability, systems thinking, they all carry enormous consequences. Think back on your career with me for just a moment. What are some of the core leadership values or principles that have shaped you and the way you lead today?
Oh, very good. When I first started with the Boeing, I got out of the Air Force and went to work in the aerospace industry. Boeing provided me the opportunity to be able to be involved in some of the most cutting-edge technology that was out there. So we supported the space program and the shuttles. We got to build the B-1 bombers, the B-2 bombers, and I started out as an assembler. As my career advanced, one of the things I learned very quickly was the Boeing culture, and that culture had a lot to do with customer focus. Quality was their number one thing that they pushed, but customer satisfaction closely trailed that, and sometimes it was hard to see which one came before the other. The thing about that was important is it helped me to understand that the end product is really a testament of who you are and the product that you're providing. So when people look at the Boeing company, whatever you're putting forward tells them what that company is. And when you stepped on a Boeing aircraft, people knew it. And there was a saying when I first started there called, if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And it was something that was echoed across the country. They knew Boeing built very, very good aircraft, and they focused very much so on the quality of that. And that stuck with me that, if you build a good product with the customer in mind, in that type of mindset, you're always going to have excellence as a thing that you pursue. And that has been the thing that has characterized my life all the way through, is that pursuit of excellence, And I saw that translate, believe it or not, over in the government, because our customer are our residents, our constituents. And always keeping them in mind as we make decisions, I think, is something that Boeing set me up for success for.
What does that mean when you're at Boeing from an individual perspective? I can understand from a company perspective what that means, but as an assembler, and then talk about your career a little bit, that actually had to mean something specific in how you practiced your job.
So for instance, when we drill the fastener holes that put the airplane together, the bolts go in, the tolerance sometimes is plus or minus a half a thousandths, depending on the type of fastener you're putting in. That is basically 1/6 of the thickness of a hair. That's how precision that hole's got to be done. Parts are made plus or minus 5 thousandths. A hair is 6 thousandths. So when you're making something, there is, and it's extremely expensive to hold those kind of tolerances, there is this pressure to cut corners or fudge things a little bit. Let's say the tolerance was plus or minus 5 thousandths. It's 7. It's not even the thickness of a third of a hair. Who's going to know? Well, it does come out, you know. So we were always taught that the integrity of what you do affects the end product. If you wanted to, you could fudge things all day long because it's hard when you're like at the peak of production on the 737s. I think we were cranking one out of the hangar, a whole airplane out of the hangar every 6 hours, 6.5 hours, something like that. And at that speed, moving that many aircraft through there, there's a lot of pressure to cut corners. And I think that's a bad thing. And they instilled in us, don't do that.
So this isn't just about caring. This is detail oriented, to the extreme, and accountability to a micron. Right? It's incredibly detailed kind of work.
Yep.
So you had a long career in aerospace, and I want to ask you about that very briefly. Just to help us understand the arc of your career and kind of the scope of responsibilities that you ultimately ended up having.
All right. I left the Air Force. I worked the flight line and flight test at Edwards Air Force Base. Was most of my career in the Air Force was at Edwards. And we did flight test of new aircraft and stuff like that. And we supported different programs like the space program because Edwards was a landing site for the shuttles and stuff. When I got out, I went to work for Rockwell as an assembler, building the B-1s. So I was the person that drilled the holes in the parts and put the parts together, and then we put the whole airplane together. And when that was done, we ended up on the flight line and did all the, the power up and the delivery of the aircraft to the end customer. Okay, so I worked that all the way through. And over the years, those first few years, I really liked the assembly work. I enjoyed, working on the aircraft, working with metal. Was very an artistic kid, and I always found that I really liked working with metal in different ways: welding, soldering, brazing, forming. We had forges we worked with. My uncle was a blacksmith. I worked for him for a while. And it was a lot of fun. But the problem we were going through that was happening in the industry is that you would work until a product was done, then you got laid off, and then you went to work someplace else. Now, in those days, in the 80s, literally, I got laid off from the B-1 program, picked up my last paycheck, walked out the door, and there was a guy from Lockheed standing on the sidewalk and said, "Hey, you want to come to work for me? You're Monte Lyons, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, how do you know?" "Well, your boss gave me your phone number, said you would be over here." He goes, "Why don't you take 2 weeks off and meet me down at the Lockheed plant, and we'll put you to work." Okay, so that's how we did it. By the time we got to the 90s, as the country started deindustrializing, that wasn't as common. And I realized that I had a young family at the time. I realized that if I wanted to stay employed and quit doing that jumping around, I needed to do something different. So that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to go to college and start getting my college degree. So I did my degrees, which I have 3, highest being a master's. I did that while working, and which was a real challenge, but it made the difference. I moved into a supervisory role, then into a management role, and as time passed, I just kept moving up to a senior manager and then an acting director. Did program management, project management. And it was just a natural progression, but demonstrating having the background in all these areas allowed me to demonstrate competence in each of these fields. So as I moved through the company, once I started that, I never got laid off again. It was, oh, you know this, let's pull you over here for a while. And it began with special assignments. And then I got put in their executive potential program and was being developed as a leader. And I got exposure to some of the key leaders within the company, or CEOs or CFOs. Learned about the different aspects of business and how you measure, whether or not you're going to pursue a project in one way or another. Then when the war broke out in 2001, I ended up on the B-1 program again and took a position there at Dyess Air Force Base, and I ran the operations there. We provided maintenance mods and upgrades to the airplanes to keep them flying. And then as time evolved, I ended up being responsible for all the field operations for them, and then eventually sustainment engineering. I was one of the senior managers of that for the Boeing company. We did modifications of the airplanes to keep them flying. The B-1s were never really intended to be a long-term bomber. They were supposed to be a stopgap between the 52 and the B-2s. And I worked the B-2 program as well. But as time evolved, we realized we need to keep these things around a while. They turned out to be very useful in ways it was never intended to be useful for. But to do that, you have to change the platform and stuff. So we did cockpit modernizations and different payload delivery mods, just different things that you do to the aircraft to keep it on the cutting edge of things. And the B-1s are still flying. I mean, the last one rolled off the assembly line, I think, in '89, and I think we're going to fly them till they're like 70 years old.
Yeah, and just to make sure, it's logistics, it's supplies, it's people management, it's financial management, it's
engineering. I mean, we used to get so frustrated. We had a thing called, I worked as a liaison engineer for a period of time, and we have what we call desktop dispositions. You would have guys that we'd have a non-conforming condition on the airplane. We would write a non-conformance record for it and send it to engineering for repair. And you had people that would not get out of their desk. They'd pull out a book, go, yeah, do this, and they'd send it back down to us. And we would look at it and like, this is not possible to do. So my job was to translate. I called it translation. You've got mechanic over here, engineer over here, and they don't speak the same language. My job was to help them talk to each other.
Monte, we've talked a lot about this. I'm sure we could spend a couple hours just talking about the details, but I have to fast forward and just ask you the obvious question. For someone who is so obviously detail-oriented and has had drilled in from the start of your career the importance of 1/6 of a hair, difference here. You finished your career in aerospace, and you decided to run for town council.
Right.
Is there any similarity at all between these two functions?
No, there's not on the surface level. There's not. It was not even close.
So maybe just tell us, why did you decide to run for town council?
Well, part of it is that I don't believe in retirement, first of all, Matt. And there comes a point where you got to know when to get off the horse. I don't know if that makes sense or not. I like riding a horse. I grew up on a farm and stuff, and you get to a certain age, it's like, I really shouldn't be on this critter, and because if I get throwed, if it missteps and falls, the injuries you're going to get as a result of it are not going to be good. You're not going to recover.
I have friends who have given up motorcycle riding for the same reason.
Same reason. Okay. So when I looked at what I was doing, I was at the top of my career. I was like, I think this is time to do something different. And I look at the fact that I have a large family. My wife and I had 7 kids. Wasn't intentional. We wanted 2 boys, 2 girls. We had 5 boys in a row. We had a daughter. She wanted a sister. We tried again, got a son. That was cool. She pressured us for another one. My wife miscarried on the 8th, and I said, we're done. I'm not going to take the chance moving forward. My children all live in Arizona except for one. And a lot of them, at the time that I was looking at running, all of them lived in Gilbert. And I'm thinking, okay, this is the community that I live in. And my children are going to be here, and I don't want to be 70-some years old and having to move because the community is going downhill. And I was watching where the town was in its life cycle, and I recognized that we were at an inflection point. And one of the things that my career in aerospace did do for me, and my kids love this, and I thought that they would hate it, but every one of them told me it was the best part of their childhood. We moved a lot for my career. So I got out, I was stationed at Edwards, went to work at Palmdale, California at Plant 42. Boeing then moved me from there to Wichita, Kansas. I went from Wichita, Kansas to Abilene, Texas, back to California, and then Oklahoma City. And then when we were all done, we were like, we're going to settle in Arizona again. Because my family's been in Arizona since the 50s. And my mother and stepfather retired over on the other side of town in Sun City. He was retired Air Force. And when they bracked Williams Field, they wanted to live near the base. So that's where they decided to settle. But in all those travels, I got to live in many different cities. And I watched communities go from being the jewel that everybody wanted to go to be the place that people couldn't get out of fast enough. And it usually came from bad decisions related to rapid growth and not preparing for what that next cycle looked like. And then when the pressure came on, good people were like, yeah, I don't want to be involved in that train wreck. So you ended up with bad people in charge. And I don't mean bad people as in evil or nefarious. I mean just unqualified. And you'd have an unqualified person making decisions about critical infrastructure or police, fire, you name it, whatever line of service a town or city provided or community. And then you would see the fallout from it. It'd be a rise in crime, depreciation in property values, deteriorating infrastructure. These were all things that would happen. And when I was looking at where Gilbert was in its life cycle, and the fact that we picked this town to, this is where all of our family's going to live, I recognized we were at that point. And with all that rapid growth, I did a real quick calculation in my mind, and I'm thinking, this is going to fail, this is going to fail, this is going to be at midlife, this is going to need some attention. And when you drive around town, you see that. And I thought, okay, I'm seeing it. I want to be a part of making sure that gets addressed properly. Because if you don't make the right decisions, and I own a house, I'm going to pay. That's usually people's biggest asset.
So, Monte, you've been on town council now for almost a year and a half.
Right.
And you and I met after you were elected, but I think it was before you got sworn in.
Right, I got elected in the primary.
Right. There was a town council retreat that I was facilitating, and you were there as an observer and taking part of all of that. And so I think I asked you, more than a year and a half ago, if you would be a guest on my podcast, because I was really interested in how someone with so much operational, hands-on, nuts and bolts, logistical business experience, how they would experience town council. So I want to ask you those questions that I've been dying to ask you for a year and a half.
Okay, very good.
So here's the first one. A lot of people say the words, government should run more like business. You've lived in both worlds. When you hear that phrase, what do people get right about it, and where do you think they misunderstand?
So in the private sector, let's say we have a problem on the assembly line with an aircraft, and one of the parts that came from the back shops, we call it, the smaller pieces that get put into the final assembly is not made correctly. I can walk over to that building, talk to the manager in that area, explain what is going on, and get that defect corrected, and get a fresh part to come back to the line and keep the line rolling fairly quickly. Okay, we move at that kind of speed, breakneck speed. Government moves at the speed of smell. Okay,
at the speed of smell?
Smell. Can't think of anything slower. But there's a reason for that. While I can go back over to the back shop in the factory and tell them what I need, and we have design authority, our engineers do, there's a lot we can do really quick. Decisions can be made right there by the people involved. When you're looking at government, you have federal regulations you got to be aware of. You have state regulations and laws you got to be aware of. You have policies, procedures in the town, county. You have all these entities that when you want to do something, you got to make sure that all of the issues that are associated with that particular topic is done. So I'll give you an example, zoning change, something very simple. Let's say you have something zone general commercial and you want to change the commercial zoning of it. Just to make sense, because you want to do something different with that property that makes sense with it. The owner of the property wants to do that. So they came to you and asked you, hey, can we make this change? You can't make that decision overnight because the stakeholder that's missing from that equation of the two people I just talked about, council and the owner, are the people in the community. They have a stake in that. Then in addition to that, you have the regulations that are around zoning and planning and all that stuff that you got to look at that applies to it as well. All of that has to be evaluated. So we have employees that's their job to take a look at a request for change. We have a planning commission that evaluates the change and goes on the recommendations that staff may make. And then it may end up having to go to the council for a vote, and then we get input from the community. We post signs out on the street saying, hey, this zoning change may be coming. Come and give us your 2 cents worth. And they do. They come down and give us our 2 cents worth. All of that has to come together before council ever makes a decision on something. That could be a year. That was very frustrating for me, especially when I can see what needs to be done and it's a no-brainer. Yep, go do that. And you're sitting there the whole time going, come on, get to the point, get to the point, get to the point. What I was missing was the fact that there is a reason all those things have to happen. And that is to ensure that the integrity of the community that you live in is maintained and the interests of the people who have a vested interest in the community are heard. And if a councilman's doing their job right, they're listening to what their constituents are telling them. And if the constituents don't have part of the equation, it's the responsibility of council to help them to understand what you're looking at. Then there should be a dialogue between the two of you to kind of get everybody on the same page. That's not easy to do.
Let me ask you your feedback on this. When I go out, I go all over the country and offer training for city council members, especially for new ones. And there is always this hurdle that we seem to reach early for newly elected people, where they have to understand that the job of an elected official is to focus on the what questions. What are the outcomes that we want for our community, but that we trust to the staff under a city manager or a town manager, the answer to the questions that begin with how.
Right.
So that city council doesn't tell the staff what photocopier lease to enter into or what fire truck to buy. But at the same time, staff doesn't tell the council what the strategic objectives should be for livability or quality of life or whatever else. What advice would you offer to someone who comes out of a business background who may not appreciate that what and how distinction for how they should spend their time coming onto a council and getting themselves acclimated to that kind of division of labor?
Well, first of all, I would tell people, if you're going to run for office, there's an expression that I grew up with is, don't write a check your butt can't cash. And people will promise a lot of things, and then they get in the office and they realize, oh, I can't do that. And it makes the constituents really aggravated. And, we were talking about the water rates here in Gilbert, which were a big, big deal. But we had failing infrastructure. And as you know, there's water issues in Arizona as far as water availability. The town of Gilbert took a very proactive approach to the water availability issue by, doing the recharge of the aquifer, getting water credits from that, drilling new wells. So like right now, if they cut off all of our water, we have the ability to be able to draw water from the aquifer for 10 years. That's how much investment we have put into that. So part of those water rates paid for that. The other thing was this water treatment plant that we have on the north side of town. If you think about places like back in Michigan where they had the nasty water coming into town, nobody likes that. That plant we had was failing. There were times when I would turn on the tap and I could taste the algae from the Verde River. It wasn't filtered out right. Changes in chemistry, changes in our weather patterns, all of that stuff impacted water quality. And the plant that we had in place wasn't cutting it. It just wasn't doing the job. So this new one is ensuring that the water that we get out of the tap is good for us and it's being treated appropriately. And that plant's going to last us for a while. The things that we noted that caused the other ones to fail, we addressed. So I'm hearing a lot of people now talking about the water rates running. We're going to cut this, we're going to cut that. Well, we bonded to build that thing. So we have to pay that. It's like taking out a mortgage and not paying the mortgage. So if you're going to take out the mortgage to buy the house, you got to make the payments. If you're going to bond to build a plant, you got to pay for that, right? And I think that's where a lot of people miss that aspect of it. Everybody recognized we needed that done. They voted and said, yeah, we're going to do this. And then when it came time to pay for it, they struggled with that. We saw tremendous inflation during the first part of this decade, caused by infusions of cash into, the money supply, which, as you know, that really messes with the cost of stuff. And that inflation translated into rising cost in fixing that stuff. The second thing we ran into with COVID, it prevented certain supplies from being readily available. And one of the first things that transpired during that period is they cut energy production. Well, oil is used in everything. So we couldn't get circuit breakers for a while because there wasn't adequate petroleum products to make the plastics for the circuit breakers and stuff. All of that translates into decisions that we're making on the dais when staff comes to us and says, hey, we need a change order for this particular project because we've seen the cost of supplies go up. Or this is a long lead part that we need earlier. We're going to have to expedite this. There's an expedite fee. So understanding those kind of things was really important. So I would tell people, be very careful when you're running. Don't play on people's emotions because that's real easy to do. And you're manipulating people when you do that. And I think that that's immoral to do because people are scared, they're frustrated, they're expressing that. Your job, I think, when you're thinking about running is understanding how can I solve that problem appropriately. And if you're coming from business, you can think, hey, I'm going to come in and I'll fix this, it'll be done. And you find out, no, that's the case. Well, how do you fix that disconnect then, because people are going to go, oh, you were on the take or you were lying. And it's not that, you just didn't know. The second thing, once you set in the seat, you need to evaluate the processes and how things are done. You need to understand it clearly, because you can recognize a couple things right away. Number one, are there opportunities to make things better? You can pick up on it, bring those forward, have discussions about it. I think that makes better government for us. And at the same time, you're going to learn things you didn't learn before, so you can take that back to your constituents and say, hey, this is what I learned. This is how this works. And it helps them understand that the people that they've hired to steward the community they live in are doing a good job. And maybe they're not. Maybe it'll flesh that out and you find out that, hey, there's some serious issues and we need a clean house, and you can put pressure on it to do that. But I have yet found a person in Gilbert that works for the town of Gilbert that comes to work going, yeah, I'm just going to kind of coast. Everybody that's here, every person that I've met, from the entry-level positions all the way up to senior leadership, every one of them really cares. And I think that's important. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But I have a personal question I want to ask you, because in your business career, I am imagining that there was a clear chain of command and a defined mission. And in local government, it would seem to be a lot messier. There's different leaders with their own priorities, and everyone's trying to balance competing interests and public opinion and legal interpretations and budgets and politics and community all expectations all at once. I'm just curious to ask you, are you ever frustrated by the messiness of the governing process when so much of your career seemingly detail-oriented, but at least ordered and structured?
And this is what's interesting. In the private sector, it may not be as ordered and structured as you would think. People do what they want to do. Sometimes they get away with it, sometimes they don't, okay? You have an end product you got to work to, yeah, that's very clear. But it's still messy there. Not as bad as government. And there is a high, if I understand your question, is it frustrating? Yes, it is, very much so. Because it should be just, clear and cut. This is what we're going to do. I'm the mayor, I'm the council, this is what I think needs to be done. And the town manager's going, wait a minute, you may want to rethink that. And you're like, well, you work for me. You're the town manager. You work for me. I'm the council. Yeah, you are, but you're going to step in something if you're not careful. So one of the things I learned real quick right out of the gate, you better pay attention to the people that are in those key roles, because not only is their job to execute, but it's keep you out of trouble too. So when I first, we had a great town manager before. Patrick Banger was just a phenomenal leader.
And a former guest on the podcast.
Has he been? Yeah, great guy. And when I would hit these, what I would call aha moments, I would go talk to Patrick. What about this? What about that? And he really helped me a lot to understand some of that, which took a lot of the frustration out of it. I think that's why this whole deal with us hiring this new town manager was so important to me, because when you have somebody of his caliber, he made a lot of stuff look really simple. He really did. And it's far from it. It's far from it.
Monte, we're getting close to the end here.
Okay.
And I've kind of been circling the same question throughout this entire interview, and I want to come back to it as my final one. One of the things that, ever since I met you, that's fascinated me about aerospace and engineering culture is that, and I only know this as an outsider, is that there's a shared vocabulary for evaluating success. I imagine it's performance and safety and cost, reliability, timelines, and measurable outcomes. In local government, the variables are very often emotional and political and deeply personal, felt by people all over the community. People in leadership roles like you can look at the exact same set of facts and arrive at very different conclusions. So where one person sees pickleball courts, another sees unnecessary taxation and government outreach, and someone else might see a missed opportunity for addressing homelessness or traffic congestion or public safety. A personal question for you, Monte. How have you adjusted to leading in an environment where agreement is often less about technical certainty and more about navigating human perspectives?
That's a great question. So you nailed the first part right. In the factories, we have visibility boards that have very clearly defined metrics. QCDMs are one of them: quality, cost, delivery, morale, and so forth, safety. So you look at these. What's your safety record for the month or the week? Or usually walk these boards every day, and we can look at our delivery schedules. Did you meet your quota for the day? That kind of stuff. Very measurable. None of it is subjective. None of it is. It's all very tangible. You can lay your hands on it. When you get to it was one of the things I looked for, and I asked Patrick about, what's your metrics? How do you measure success here? And it's not as clear cut. Now, one of the ways we do measure success, and this is very high level, is we have to have, by Arizona statute, a balanced budget. Okay? We have level of service that our community expects us to deliver. If you can fit the level of service you're providing within the budget you got, that's a successful metric. Does that make sense? But when you're talking about the difference between a pickleball court and maybe a street repavement or resealing, that's a whole different equation, because there's one whole part of our community that's like, we need pickleball courts, we need splash pads, we need more bike trails, dog parks, that kind of stuff. Then you got another part of the community that's like, no, we need better streets, we need more law enforcement, we need more motor officers on the street. Well, you can't have both. How do you reconcile that? Growing up in a rural environment the way I did, ideal for me is not a lot of what we see in the town. If it was up to me, I'd be living out in the middle of nowhere and have me a couple cows and a horse and a dog and a neighbor so far away that I don't even know if he's there. I hear your neighbor's right next door, and you may have sharp disagreements with each other on what's really needed in the community. The thing that you've got to do is you've got to get out and listen to the people in the community and see what they're saying to you. And then when you realize that you can't provide everything they're asking, you better be able to communicate why and be able to set those priorities appropriately. So like one of the things we do on a regular basis is we look at our CIP projects. And we've shuffled the deck so many times on that since I've been on council, it's not funny. But we're asking the question, can we afford it? Is this a priority? Has something changed? In that thing that changed, does that reshuffle the priorities? And if you look at some of the public meetings we've had around that, you can see where we were pushing this group of CIP projects at first quarter of this year. And when you get to the third quarter, it's changed somewhat priority-wise. And there are many things that drive that. It can be what changes in what the community prioritizes. It could be failures in infrastructure you didn't plan on that now you have to, and you've got to reshuffle the deck. Good example of this, we've taken a $20 million cut in revenue due to changes that transpired at the legislature. Well, you take $20 million, Gilbert's supposedly got a $2.4 billion budget, and that's not exactly correct. Our operating budget's about $800 million. The delta between the two is our CIP projects, as we make sure that we've got the money to complete what we've said we're going to do. I think there was one of the municipalities here in the Valley that started a project back in the early part of this decade and couldn't finish it because they didn't have the money allocated to do it. So it sat there half finished for a while. We don't do that here. If we're going to say we're going to build a fire station, the money's going to be there to build that fire station. It's going to get built. Just that simple.
Yeah, and a year and a half ago, there was a increase in the sales tax, use tax, and bed tax for the first time in 20 some odd years here in the town to pay for all that.
To pay for that stuff. Yep, that's exactly right. So when you see a $20 million cut in budget, that's a lot of money. And like right now, we have the lowest staffing per 1,000 residents in the Valley. So when people talk about, well, you can cut waste out of the government, we have the leanest workforce, I think, in the state of Arizona. And they're providing, I think, some of the best quality of service delivery of any municipality in the state. So when we start looking at a $20 million cut and you're already running lean, now you're starting to cut into the bone. That's a whole different ballpark. I have to give our staff credit. They have this exercise they do that was actually introduced, I think, by the spouse of one of our current council members, and she was very smart. And they have this exercise they call the Hunger Games. And we do zero-based budgeting every year. And they go in and they hammer out between the departments. And this is where all of our departments work really well together. and how I know when I'm sitting on the council and the budget's brought before me, I know that it's been vetted. Now, I'll look at it and get down into the details of it, and some of it I'm like, okay, and others I'm like, yeah, that's really smart. But I know that they've done their due diligence because they'll sit in a room and each department will argue for what they've got, but they also advocate for each other. And that way, when we get that final budget, we know that it is meeting every requirement that we can affordably meet. And then they tell us also where the gap is. Yeah. So right now, we could really use another 180 staff members, and people would freak out on that. But I can tell you, if you drive down Higley, I call it the Higley-Appalus 500, or you're down on Riggs Road, traffic is flying. I personally think we need more motor officers, at least 12, which would be 6 teams that would be on the street, on motorcycles, monitoring traffic, writing tickets, making sure stuff's done. Because we've seen in this decade, half decade that we're in right now, almost the same amount of fatal collisions in Gilbert that happened the entire whole decade before. So there were 77, I think, vehicle deaths in the teens. Here we are in the 20s, and we're at 70, I think, right now was a number given to me the other day. Chief Solberg will crucify me if I don't have it exactly right, but it's about that. And to fix that, it requires people on the street, okay? Well, if I've got a 180 person gap there, how are we going to close that? So like one of the things that we're looking at right now is how do we grow our way out of that loss of revenue and increase our revenue without having to raise taxes or property taxes. Part of that is economic growth. And we can fill that gap. Now, not all of those 180 positions are, police officers, but when you have maintenance that you got to defer because you don't have enough people in the facilities department, that has a direct impact. It's like skipping an oil change, to make the budget. And that's some of the decisions these people have to make.
Monte Lyons, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to visit with me. Thanks for being open to the conversation. It's been really wonderful talking to you.
Same here. I thank you for the opportunity, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come forward and kind of express my history and how it relates to government. And I hope that it helps people understand that this is a very difficult job. We need good people willing to run and willing to do it. So I would just encourage folks, if you're at a stage in life that you can give back to your community, this is a great role to do it in. And it would be one of the greatest services you could ever do to the place that you live and your family lives.
I second that, and I applaud your efforts. Thanks so much, Monte.
Thank you.
My thanks again to Councilmember Monte Lyons of the town of Gilbert in Arizona. What stands out for me from this conversation is the insight that leadership changes when the variables change. In aerospace and engineering, there are often measurable standards for success: performance, reliability, timelines, precision. But in public leadership, the work is more human. The challenge is not simply executing a plan, it's navigating competing priorities, community expectations, emotional realities, and the difficult work of building enough agreement for people to move forward together. And Monte's journey from worldwide aerospace operations into local governance also highlights something important about the distinction between management and governance. Local elected leaders are not there to run day-to-day operations. They're there to help communities make choices about priorities and direction and values and trust. And that's a very different kind of leadership, and maybe that's worth reflecting on in our own communities. What does good leadership actually require right now? More efficiency? Better systems, greater transparency? Probably yes to all of those. But also, as Monte said, the patience to listen, the discipline to separate governance from management, and the humility to recognize that public decisions are rarely driven by data alone. Hey, if this conversation sparked an idea, raised a question, or stirred something in your own leadership journey, I'd love to hear from you. Call me at 602-688-2724 and leave a message. Ask a question, share a reflection, or suggest a topic you'd like to hear more deeply explored. I listen to every message, and your input genuinely helps shape future episodes. If you'd be open to sharing some of the hard-earned lessons from your own leadership journey, I invite you to apply to be a guest. You'll find the podcast guest link in the show notes. Your story may help another leader see their own work more clearly as they serve their community. And if you value meaningful civic conversation, I invite you to subscribe to my new Substack column. It's called Democracy Runs on Dialogue. You'll find the link in the show notes. I welcome you to that community. Community Catalyst is edited by Nick, Living the Dream Tentillo, and I am delighted to welcome Cinnamon Denise Murray to the team as our new producer. Cinnamon brings tremendous creativity, insight, and enthusiasm for the bigger vision of what this podcast can become, and I am genuinely excited for what lies ahead. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.